My name is Rachel Whitmore. I knew at the moment I walked through the door, something about the air felt heavier than usual, like it was bracing me for a blow I wouldn't be able to dodge. My parents greeted me like they always did, polite, practiced, emotionally distant. My mother barely glanced up from arranging the envelope stack on the coffee table. My father gave me a half smile that didn't reach his eyes, and Emma practically glowed. She wore that soft pink dress she always saved for moments of triumph. That should have been my first warning. Everyone was gathered in the living room, cousins, aunts, a few close family friends. It wasn't a huge group, but big enough that you could feel the weight of every eye when someone spoke. Especially in our family, they said we were meeting to hear the final will, to make things official, to do this as a family, but what they really meant was, come witness the coronation. And deep down, I already knew who the crown would go to. I took a seat in the corner, next to the bookshelf I used to hide behind as a child. Funny how we return to our old hiding places when the air starts to feel too sharp. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to look composed, not bitter, not broken. The attorney started reading. His voice was neutral, almost clinical, as if the words didn't carry weight. To our beloved daughter Emma, the house, the lake property, the savings account, my mother's jewelry, my father's old coin collection. One by one they ticked off every piece of the life we'd built and placed it gently in Emma's lap, and I just sat there frozen, watching my sister receive it all with a smile like it was her birthright. No one even looked my way. Not when they applauded her. Not when they raised their glasses. Not when my father handed her the family ring, slipping it onto her finger like some kind of twisted engagement to a legacy I was born into but never allowed to keep. I thought I'd grown numb to it. I thought the years of being second, of being invisible, had dulled the sting, but it didn't. Not this time, because this was final. This wasn't a birthday party where Emma got the bigger cake, or a graduation where they skipped my name. This was our family story being rewritten in ink, and my name had been left off the page. I blinked hard and forced myself to breathe through my nose. I didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of them. Emma leaned into my mother, whispering something that made them both laugh quietly. I looked away, and then a sound. A scrape of a chair leg across the hardwood floor. My grandfather stood up. He hadn't said a word all evening, hadn't even clapped, just sat still with that unreadable look he wore like armor. But now he moved slowly, deliberately, like every step meant something. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick, worn envelope. I heard it before I saw it, the soft crinkle of paper that had been handled too many times. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like thunder. I was hoping I wouldn't need this, he said. Silence. Every head turned, even Emma froze. He walked to the attorney and handed it over. His will, his final say. And in that moment, something shifted. I didn't know what it meant yet, but my hands stopped trembling. Because maybe, just maybe, someone had finally seen me. Growing up with Emma meant growing up in her shadow, and shadows, as I learned early on, don't get celebrated. They don't get noticed. They don't get remembered in family photo albums or in bedtime stories about the one who made us proud. From the time she could walk, Emma was the one with the spotlight. She had this way of dazzling people, of performing sweetness like it was her native tongue. My parents adored her, doted on her, praised her even when there wasn't anything to praise. A participation ribbon turned into a parade. A polite thank you note became a virtue. I, on the other hand, was dependable, quiet, the child who didn't ask for much. I thought that would count for something. I kept my grades up, never broke curfew, cooked dinner when Mom had a migraine, helped Dad wash the car when Emma said she was too tired. I once won an academic scholarship for years paid in full, and my parents congratulated me with a distracted smile and a reminder not to forget Emma's recital that night. Emma, who barely passed her classes, got a new car just for trying. That was the difference between us. I worked for everything, and she was handed everything, and still, she always managed to make me feel like I had the problem. Emma had this effortless confidence, like the world belonged to her and we were all just living in it. I think it was that certainty that made people want to believe in her. Or maybe they just liked the way it felt to love someone so sure of their place. I used to wonder what it would be like to walk into a room and know you were wanted there, not tolerated, not compared, just wanted. I didn't resent her at first, I just tried harder. I thought if I kept showing up, if I kept doing good, they'd see me. But trying in our family was a game you could never win unless you were born. already holding the trophy. It didn't matter that I got a job right out of college, or that I moved out on my own before I turned 25. It didn't matter that I never asked for help. Never needed a safety net. Emma bounced between jobs and breakups, and still my parents paid her rent when she was short, bought her furniture when she moved again, and called her resilient. I guess when you fall often enough, people start to think the falling is part of the charm. The year I got promoted, I told them over dinner. They smiled, nodded, then changed the subject to Emma's new boyfriend and how they might finally get grandkids. That was the night I stopped trying to make them proud, not because I gave up, but because I finally realized they were never looking in my direction to begin with. So sitting in that living room, watching Emma beam while they handed her the world, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like the natural ending to a story that had always been about her. I'd already grieved the parts of myself they refused to love. But even still, even after all the years of being pushed aside, some small part of me hoped this would be different, that maybe they'd finally recognize the girl who stayed silent and steady, who gave without taking, who stood in the wings so her sister could shine. But no, the spotlight was Emma's. It always had been. Until my grandfather stood up. And then, for the first time in my life, something unexpected happened. The room stopped looking at her and started looking at me. I've always believed that families have unspoken roles, like characters in a play that no one auditions for but everyone is expected to perform. Emma was cast as the star, the golden child, the one who sparkled under the lights. Even when the script didn't make sense, I was the understudy who never got called to the stage. My job was to clap when she finished a scene, smile when she took her bow, fade into the wings while she soaked in the applause. That evening, sitting in that overdecorated living room, I saw it all play out again. The performance, only this time, it felt more rehearsed than ever. Emma did what Emma always did, tilted her head just right, blinked those soft lashes, and soaked up every word of praise with the practiced grace of someone who's never been told no. She wasn't just receiving a will, she was receiving validation. She played her part like she'd been waiting her whole life for this exact line. To our beloved daughter Emma, it wasn't just the house or the accounts. It was the story that came with it. You are enough. You've always been enough. This is all yours. And the rest of them, the audience, they clapped along. My aunt wiped a tear. My uncle toasted with a too loud cheer. Even my mother looked on with this dreamy, satisfied expression, like she'd finally delivered her masterpiece. My father said something about legacy and tradition, his voice thick with pride. They were all so wrapped up in the script they'd written. No one noticed the girl in the corner, the one whose lines were cut. I sat there, still, watching but not participating. I'd been here before, so many times, quiet in the chaos, invisible in the celebration. I knew how to nod at the right moments, how to swallow the lump in my throat before it showed in my eyes. That kind of emotional choreography becomes second nature after enough years of rehearsals. But even as I tried to disappear into the furniture, I couldn't help but scan the room, not for comfort, not for understanding, just to see if anyone noticed the silence sitting in my lap. And then I saw him. My grandfather. He was still, hands folded in front of him, not smiling, not clapping. His eyes weren't on Emma, they were on me. It wasn't a warm look, not exactly. It wasn't even sympathy. It was something quieter, sharper, like he saw something the others had missed, like he was watching a different scene unfold entirely. We didn't share many words, my grandfather and the first, but we shared silences, and sometimes that said more. Growing up, he'd slip me books he thought I'd like, or ask me what I was reading when no one else remembered. I loved to write. He never offered praise the way my parents did to Emma. But when I was 17 and won a small local poetry contest, he mailed me a leather journal with no note, just my name embossed on the front. I never told anyone about that. It felt like ours. So when he stood up that day, my breath caught. The room didn't notice him at first. They were still clapping, still caught up in Emma's moment, but his chair scraped back against the hardwood, and the sound cut clean through the noise, and for the first time that evening, the performance stopped, the applause faded, Emma's smile faltered, and everyone turned. My grandfather had something to say, and it wasn't part of their script. At first, no one quite knew what to do with the silence. It fell suddenly, awkwardly, like someone had dropped something fragile and no one wanted to move in case it shattered further. My grandfather's movements were slow but deliberate. He stood tall despite the years that had hunched his shoulders, and I noticed, For the first time in a long while, how commanding he could be when he wanted to. There was no clearing of his throat, no dramatic pause, just the subtle sound of paper brushing against wool as he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick, worn envelope. He held it in his hand for a second, almost like he was reconsidering, then he looked at me, not around me, not past me, directly at me, and when he spoke, his voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to carry weight. "I was hoping I wouldn't need this," he said. A few people shifted in their seats. My father blinked, confused. My mother tilted her head slightly. Emma furrowed her brows, that perfect expression of polite curiosity she'd mastered. But I stopped breathing because I knew. I didn't know exactly what was inside that envelope, but I knew. This moment was not about Emma, not anymore. He walked toward the attorney, each step deliberates, each second stretching just a little longer than it needed to. I watched his hand extend. The envelope passed from his fingers to the lawyer's. I saw the hesitation on the lawyer's face too, like he was just realizing the play had been rewritten and he didn't have. "The new script, this is my will," my grandfather said plainly. "Not theirs, mine." His words dropped like stones into a pond. Ripples spread through the room. My mother's face went pale. My father opened his mouth but said nothing. Emma, to her credit, didn't react at all. She just crossed her legs and leaned back slightly, that same polite curiosity still sitting on her face, like maybe this was just a formality, an addendum, a symbolic gesture, but I knew it wasn't. He turned to me again. "Rachel, come here." My legs felt heavy, but I stood. I hadn't realized how much I was trembling until I crossed the room. His hand reached for mine, a firm grip, calloused and familiar. He looked into my eyes with a seriousness I hadn't seen since I was a child. "I've watched long enough," he said quietly, "longer than I should have." My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. There was something sacred in the moment that words couldn't touch. The attorney opened the envelope slowly, scanning the contents, his brow furrowed, then lifted. He cleared his throat and said, "This supersedes the previous will." "What does that mean?" my father asked sharply. "It means," the attorney replied, "that the assets named in this document are substantial. They're held separately from your accounts, and they've been left entirely to Rachel." The silence was louder this time. My mother gasped. Emma's posture stiffened. My father leaned forward like he hadn't heard correctly. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My name echoed in my ears like it had finally been invited to stay. And my grandfather, he didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He just gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You were never the favorite," he said, voice low. "But you were always the one who showed heart. You're who I trust." And just like that, the spotlight shifted, not by force, not by fight, but by truth, the kind of truth that had been waiting patiently, quietly, for its moment. And somehow, against all odds, that moment had come. I don't remember sitting back down. Everything after the attorney's words blurred, like someone had tilted the room on its side and I was trying to hold onto the floor. I could still feel my grandfather's hand on mine, the echo of his voice in my chest. "You're who I trust." That sentence rang louder than any applause Emma had ever received. And it undid something in me, a knot that had been wound so tightly, for so long, I didn't realize how deeply it had cut into me. The attorney kept reading, and each word was a quiet earthquake. A portfolio of land holdings in 3 counties. Commercial properties I'd never even heard of, trust funds, investments, liquid assets all in my name. It wasn't just more than my parents had left Emma, it was more than they even knew existed. My grandfather had kept it all separate, tucked away in silence, building a legacy the rest of them had no idea he was capable of, and now it was mine. The room felt colder suddenly. No one spoke. My father sat with his mouth slightly open, his mind likely racing through legal possibilities. My mother looked like she had been slapped across the face. Emma, my perfectly poised sister, sat unnaturally still. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wasn't blinking as much. That softness she wore like perfume had faded. She didn't look angry yet, just stunned. Like the center of gravity had suddenly shifted and she didn't know where to put her feet. I watched them absorb the truth, and for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't try to make myself small to soothe the discomfort of others. I just sat in it, in the weight of what had finally been handed to me, not as a gift, not as an apology, but as recognition. My grandfather had never spoken much about money. He wasn't flashy. He lived simply. His home was modest, his routines quiet. But behind that stillness had been movement, intentional, deliberate movement. He had been planning this for years, decades maybe, and none of us had seen it coming, especially not Emma. When the reading finished, the attorney folded the documents neatly and placed them back into the envelope. "That concludes the reading," he said. "Unless there are any questions." There were no questions, just silence and stunned expressions. My father was the first to stand, though it took him a moment. "Dad," he started, but my grandfather raised a hand. "I've made my decision." "But you could have told us. I watched you all do what you thought was right," my grandfather said calmly, and I stayed quiet, hoping maybe you'd see her. "But you didn't." I lowered my eyes then. I couldn't hold his gaze, not yet. I was still trying to believe this wasn't a dream I'd wake from. Emma finally spoke. "You're punishing me for being loved." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge in it now. Not the soft silk of her usual tone, but something tighter. She looked at me, and for a flicker of a second, I saw it: fear, not jealousy, not confusion, fear, because for the first time, the rules didn't apply. Her beauty, her charm, her carefully curated innocence, none of it had changed what was written in that will. "No," my grandfather replied. "I'm rewarding the one who never asked to be seen but kept showing up anyway." I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just sat there, letting the truth settle into my skin. They handed her the spotlight. But he handed me the legacy. Later that night, after the guests had left and the tension had thinned into a kind of stunned quiet, I sat with my grandfather in the den. The house had grown dark around us, the only light coming from a dim lamp that cast a golden hue over the room. I hadn't said much since the will was read. My parents were locked in their bedroom, no doubt stewing in confusion and humiliation. Emma had left without a word, her car tires screeching softly as she pulled away from the curb. But I stayed, not because I wanted to gloat, or because I didn't know where else to go. I stayed because I needed to understand. My grandfather poured 2 glasses of tea, not bothering with anything fancy. We sat in the silence, sipping slowly. It reminded me of when I was little, and he'd invite me into his study just to sit with him while he read. I used to think he liked the company, but maybe, I realized now, he just wanted me to feel like I had a place somewhere, even if no one else noticed I was there. "Why me?" I finally asked. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but he didn't ask me to repeat it. He just looked at me, eyes tired but clear. "Because you were never waiting to be chosen," he said. "You just kept showing up." I swallowed hard. "You saw all of it, didn't you? Every time they cut you out of a moment, I saw it. Every time you did something good, and they barely looked up. You never made a scene, never asked for praise, but you had heart, Rachel. That's more rare than talent, rare than charm." I don't know why his words made me want to cry. Maybe because they were so simple, so honest, like they had been sitting inside him for years, just waiting for the right moment to be spoken aloud. I had spent my whole life feeling like a ghost in my own family, trying not to take up space, trying not to need too much, and here he was, telling me I had been seen the whole time, not just noticed, understood. He went on, his voice steady and even. "Emma was always going to be celebrated. That's just how your parents were. She gave them the illusion of success. You gave them steadiness, but they didn't know how to value that. People confuse the loud ones for the strong ones. But strength is in restraint too, in kindness that isn't flashy and holding your head up when no one hands you a reason to." I felt something loosen in my chest, a grief I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "I didn't expect anything from tonight," I said. "I know," he nodded. "That's what made you worthy of it." I wanted to ask more about the properties, the trust, the years he spent planning all of this in silence. But the truth was, none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was the way he looked at me, like I was enough, like I always had been. We talked until the tea went cold, no grand speeches, no flowery explanations, just the quiet filling in all the cracks that had formed over decades of being unseen. And when I went to bed that night, I lay there in the guest room with the knowledge that for the first time in my life, I didn't have to fight to prove my worth. Someone had already done it for me. The next morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. There was no clatter of dishes in the kitchen, no footsteps echoing through the hallway, no soft hum of casual conversation, just silence, thick and waiting. I got up early, not out of habit, but because sleep had become a stranger in the wake of everything. I wandered into the sunroom with a cup of coffee I didn't really want, half expecting the world to feel different, but it didn't. The furniture was the same. The garden beyond the window was still overgrown and unkempt. The sunlight still filtered through the same smudged glass panes, and yet, something had shifted. Inside me, at least. I heard the door open behind me and turned to find Emma standing there. She didn't look like the version of herself she usually offered to the world. The soft, glowing version with pastel sweaters and perfectly curled hair. She was still in her clothes from the night before. Her eyes tired. Her voice thinner than I remembered. "We should talk," she said. I nodded, motioning for her to sit. Though I knew we weren't going to find peace in this room, she didn't waste time. "I just don't understand," she said, staring at her hands. "Why would he do that? Why would he go behind everyone's back and give it all to you?" There was no venom in her voice yet, just confusion. Like she was trying to make the math work in her head and couldn't find the formula. I felt something between pity and sadness, not for what she had lost, but for how completely she had believed the world owed her everything. Maybe he saw something in me that no one else did. I replied quietly. Her head snapped up, the first flash of anger slipping through. "So, what? You think I don't deserve anything? You think I didn't work hard too?" I took a breath. "Emma, it's not about deserving. It's about who he trusted to carry something forward. Who he believed would protect what mattered." Her eyes narrowed. "You sound just like him, self-righteous, acting like being quiet makes you some kind of saint." I flinched, not at her words, but at how desperately she needed this to be about fairness. About betrayal. She couldn't fathom the possibility that this wasn't revenge. It was correction. That the man who watched her bask in years of unearned attention had finally stepped in and handed the weight of legacy to the one person who had never asked for it. "You don't have to understand it," I said. "It wasn't yours to decide." Her lip trembled. "Do you even want it? The money, the properties, all of it?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was complicated. I hadn't spent my life dreaming of wealth. I had spent my life dreaming of acknowledgement, of being seen. The inheritance wasn't a prize. It was a confirmation, a quiet, steady voice saying, "You mattered. I want the chance to do something meaningful with it," I finally said, "to make something that lasts." She stood suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said, standing too. "But for once it doesn't make me less." Emma stared at me for a long time, her breath shaky. Then she left without another word, and I let her because for the first time, I didn't need to chase understanding. I didn't need to explain myself or shrink or smooth over the cracks. Let them show. Let them split open. Sometimes the spotlight burns too hot, and sometimes it reveals the fractures no one wanted to see. The phone calls started 2 days later. First came my Aunt Caroline, the one who used to forget my name at family barbecues. She left a bright voicemail, laced with sugary concern. "Hi sweetie, just wanted to check in. See how you're holding up after all that surprise." "What? A whirlwind, huh? We should get lunch soon. Just the two of us." She sounded rehearsed, like someone who'd practiced her tone in the mirror. I didn't call back. Then came the others, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, a neighbor I barely remembered from high school, even my father's former business partner. Their voices were almost identical in rhythm. Congratulations wrapped in curiosity. Concern dressed up as care. They wanted to know how I was feeling. They wanted to know if I needed help sorting through everything. They wanted to know if there might be room for them in the new version of things. My parents didn't call, but they didn't have to. My mother sent an email that read more like a memo than a message. "We should sit down soon to discuss how this changes things. We believe your grandfather may have been influenced during a vulnerable period. Let us know when you're available." No warmth, no reflection, just strategy. And Emma was quiet. I didn't respond to any of them right away, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I didn't want to answer as the version of they expected, the Rachel who bent to accommodate, who softened herself to make other people more comfortable. I was tired of trimming myself down to fit inside the idea they'd built of me. Instead, I drove out to one of the properties Wilby had mentioned. It was a stretch of land about an hour outside the city, nothing fancy, no mansion, no polished fences or fountains, just acres of quiet green, tall grass swaying in the wind, the bones of something that could become beautiful. I stood there a long time, letting the air settle around me. I thought about what legacy really meant. Not money, not real estate, not even power. Exactly. It was something quieter than that. Legacy was truth. It was someone choosing to believe in who you are when no one else does. It was being handed a future because someone saw the way you carried Year passed, the land felt untouched, almost sacred, like it had been waiting. And maybe that's what this all was, not a victory, not a revenge story, but a kind of reclamation, a rewriting, not just of the family's version of me but my own. For so long, I'd accepted the roles they gave me, the quiet one, the dependable one, the invisible one. I wore their expectations like a second skin, but now, that skin was peeling off, and underneath was someone I was still getting to know. When I got back to the house, I found another email from my mother. This time, it was longer, less clipped. She said she hoped we could talk soon. She said the family was in shock. She said she hoped I could keep the bigger picture in mind. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or cry, because the bigger picture, the one they'd all painted over and over again, had never included me. And now that I was holding the brush, they wanted a say in the composition. But I didn't owe them a place in this new version, not unless they came with honesty. Not unless they came ready to see me without conditions. Families rewrite each other all the time. They shape memories to fit comfort. They erase truths that don't serve the story. But I wasn't letting them hold the pen anymore. I returned to the land again a few days later. This time with a notebook and a pen, no plans, no blueprint. Just a need to sit with it, to let it speak to me the way my grandfather once did, without pressure or noise. The wind rustled through the tall grass like a whisper, the trees standing watch as if they remembered things I hadn't lived. There was something humbling about standing on something you own but didn't earn in the traditional sense. This land didn't come from grinding in a cubicle or making all the right moves. It came from being seen, from being believed in, and I didn't take that lightly. I sat on the hood of my car, staring out at the empty stretch, and wondered what my grandfather had pictured for this place. A sanctuary, a farm, a home for a version of me that hadn't existed yet. I'll never know, but I do know this: he didn't give it to me so I could hoard it. He gave it to me so I could become something bigger than I'd been allowed to be. Legacy isn't about land or money, it's about voice, about choosing who gets to carry your truth forward. I think he knew my parents wouldn't protect his name, not in the way he wanted. They would have sold the land off in pieces, reinvested it into status, wrapped it up in ribbon and performance. Emma would have posed for photos and donated a fraction to some cause with her name plastered across the top. None of it would have felt like him, but me. I remember the way he shelled peas on the porch without saying a word. I remember how he always sat through Emma's dramatics in silence but looked at me when she left the room. I remember how he kept his hands rough even though he could have paid others to do the dirty work. He valued stillness, he respected quiet strength, and I think, in his way, he saw those things in me. So I decided to build something here, something real, not flashy, not performative. A space for others who'd been overlooked, a retreat, maybe a creative space, a center for people like me who were always asked to wait in the wings. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had time. And I had the freedom to make something that didn't need anyone's approval. Later that evening, I walked through the field with my boots caked in dirt and my heart somehow lighter than it had been in years. I looked up at the sky, and for a moment, I imagined my grandfather standing beside me, hands in his pockets, nodding once, silently, the way he always did when he was proud but didn't know how to say it. Back at the house, I opened the old journal he gave me when I was 17, the one with my name engraved on the cover. I hadn't written in it for years, but now I put pen to paper with a kind of urgency. I didn't write about Emma or my parents or what they took from me. I wrote about what I'd finally been given. Space. Belief. A beginning. For the first time, my story didn't have to be a reaction to someone else's. It could just be mine, and that, I realized, was what legacy really meant. I returned to the house a week later, not out of obligation, but out of choice. There was a family dinner planned, one of those Sunday night traditions that used to revolve around Emma's schedule and my parents' mood. I hadn't been to one in months, maybe longer. Not since the last time I walked through the door and felt like a guest in my own bloodline. This time, it was different. I parked in the driveway next to Emma's car and stood for a moment before going in. My reflection stared back at me from the glass of the front door, steady, quiet, but no longer small. I didn't need to prepare myself. I didn't need to practice politeness or shrink into something more acceptable. I had been given no script, and I wasn't interested in playing the role of the overlooked sister anymore. Inside, the table was already set. My mother moved about the kitchen with tight shoulders, her usual grace wrapped in tension. My father looked up when I entered and gave a slight nod, more acknowledgement than welcome. Emma was seated, wine glass in hand, her smile already waiting measured, cool. She always wore her control like a scarf, draped casually but close to the throat. "Rachel," she said, "you made it." I did. My voice was calm. Even. I took my seat across from her and said nothing more. I didn't need to. Dinner unfolded with polite conversation to polite. The kind that strains under the weight of what's unspoken. No one mentioned the will. No one said my grandfather's name. They spoke about work, about weather, about how the neighbor's dog had gotten loose again. But every pause was louder than the words. Every silence a reminder they didn't know how to talk to me anymore. I was no longer the daughter they pitied or the sister they disregarded. I was something else now, something that didn't fit into their version of our family, and I was fine with that. After the plates were cleared, my father walked me to the door. He didn't say much, but as I turned to leave, he rested his hand on the frame and asked, "You doing okay?" It wasn't warm, it wasn't even curious. It was the question of a man who didn't know how to meet someone who no longer needed his validation. "I'm better than okay," I said. He nodded once, a little too fast, then stepped back inside. I walked to my car with the cool evening air wrapping around me like truth. The house behind me was still full of people, but I didn't feel like I was walking away from family. I felt like I was walking towards something more honest. That night, I sat by my window, looking out over the city. My journal lay open beside me, filled with ideas, dreams, and plans I never thought I'd have the room to imagine. My grandfather's voice echoed softly in my memory. "You were always the one who showed heart." They handed her the spotlight, but he handed me the legacy, and I carried it not with noise, not with bitterness, but with the quiet, steady strength of someone who no longer needed to be seen to know her own worth. I used to think being overlooked was the worst thing in the world. But sometimes, in the space where no one's watching, you become who you were always meant to be, and that, in the end, was my quiet victory.